Thank you. All right. So we begin where we ended last time, because what we're doing here is progressive. We're building as we go along, looking at statements, and we're going to end with a whole barrage of Bible verses. But I want to go through the concepts first in the spirit of prophecy, because that's the place everybody's going for their weapons. What we want to see is that what one group is saying is in the spirit of prophecy, but they're leaving out all the quotations the other group is using. So we've got two different sets of quotations being used, but all of them are from the spirit of prophecy. So shouldn't we just look at all of them? All right. So what we're going to find as we look at all the spirit of prophecy statements that bear on this, no matter where you go, and we can't look at every single statement. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we're going to look at enough statements in enough broad spectrum that we will catch that no matter what we're looking at is talking about the unique nature of Jesus, the uniqueness of his person. And if you can establish that in your mind, that he is unique, I think it's going to be very difficult to turn around and say he's like something else, no matter what it is. Okay? To me, that seems like a very simple thing, but it isn't simple. You start talking to people about this who believe that or who believe that, they will not be shaken from what they believe no matter what you tell them. And I believe there's something wrong with that. Now, I am not here to judge people, but I have to tell you, it seems very clear to me that sin has created a major problem on how human beings receive communication from God. If that were not so, we would not have the problems we have in our midst. Why should a Seventh-day Adventist sitting there be arguing with a Seventh-day Adventist sitting there? There is something really wrong with that. So let's look at some of the statements then. And I am picking statements at random in the spirit of prophecy that deal with the person of Christ. Now, if you have a statement that you think bears on this that we're leaving out, please bring it up. We don't want to leave anything out if you think it's important. Okay? We're not afraid here to discuss any statement in the spirit of prophecy. We have no favorites among the quotations. They all are from God. All right, so let's look at a few and let's see what we come to here. Patriarchs and Prophets. Now, that is not a hidden book. Everybody has that one. Okay. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 480. Moses was a type of Christ. He himself had declared to Israel, "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him you shall hearken." Deuteronomy 18:15. God saw fit to discipline Moses in the school of affliction and poverty before he could be prepared to lead the hosts of Israel to the earthly Canaan. The Israel of God journeying to the heavenly Canaan have a captain who needed no human teaching to prepare him for his mission as a divine leader. Yet he was made perfect through sufferings. Are you making the connection? Moses, through a certain kind of suffering, was developed to be a leader. Jesus, who had no problems, still had to learn through suffering. Continuing. He was made perfect through sufferings, in that he himself has suffered, being tempted. Now you see, I'm going to stop there because the way people read these kinds of statements is they jump on the word tempted instead of reading the context. He suffered. That's the context. He suffered under being tested. Yet he is able to succor them that are tempted. Hebrews 2:10 and 18. Our Redeemer manifested no human weakness or imperfection. Yet he died to obtain for us an entrance into the promised land. Now I know the vast majority of the people sitting in the pews here every Sabbath have read that paragraph. But somehow we don't get the message. It said Jesus had no imperfections. None. Zero. How come we're not getting it? He had no human weakness. Oh, that's a big one. That's what it said. Go read the book. Last week, the statement we concluded with said he was innocent. Those are the last words we read last week. Can you think of anybody that you know can be said they are innocent? All right, let's get out of our generation. Let's go back 1,000 years. Let's figure out if you can find one innocent person in that time. Well, let's go back all the way to Adam then. Can you think of one innocent person after Adam sinned? There aren't any, are there? Well, Jesus was innocent. I don't know about you, but it's piling up on my brain and my heart that we can't find anybody like Jesus. Well, if we can't find anybody like Jesus, we can't make Jesus like somebody that doesn't exist. Now, I am not trying to be facetious here, but it seems to me that anybody who's listening ought to be paying attention that there's something wrong with some of the things that are being said today. Something horribly wrong. Because if they're not talking the Bible, what in the world are they talking about? I have a real problem coming up with gray areas about what God teaches. I've tried for years to try to figure out if that works, and I have never been able to make it work. God either says this or he doesn't. There is no gray place in there where I can say, well, I would like to suggest that there's room in there to bring in this thought too. I don't think so. Moses, in Deuteronomy here, has said, there will be a prophet like me. Now that's biblical. Jesus came. Now, could we say, based on that statement, that Jesus was just like Moses? That's too big a jump, isn't it? Like me, beautiful. Just like me, no way. Do you see what that one word does? That one word destroys sanity. You can't have A be non-A at the same time. Only insane people think that. Now, I for 25 years have treaded like I was walking on eggs when I got to this subject because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But I can't do it anymore. Not because I have lost my compassion for people. That isn't the reason. The reason is because the Lord has revealed certain things to me that I have held on to for years and years and haven't spent a lot of time sharing it with majority of people. But you know, someday I'm going to die. And it's looking closer than it used to. And I don't want to go down and the record says he could have said something, but he didn't. I believe I have a responsibility to people. Whether they want to hear or not, that's up to them. But something needs to be said about where in the spirit of prophecy it deals with these things, and more importantly, where the scriptures deal with it. So we're moving it on it. Let's continue here. 5 BC, page 1117. I want to move into a thought here that may help us understand something that's not talked about very much. 5 BC 1117. His inclination to write. I don't know how much you know about the various views, but that goes right against the popular views. His inclination to write was a constant gratification to his parents. The questions he asked them led them to study most earnestly the great elements of truth. His soul-stirring words about nature and the God of nature opened and enlightened their minds. Jesus, what was his inclination? His inclination was to write. It was not a bent to sin. It was an inclination to write. That's God's words to us. I don't want to ever bend those words. He had a constant inclination to write. Let's read another one that Ellen White wrote in Youth's Instructor. And you know, if you don't have Youth's Instructor, you ought to get it. If you thought it was just for the youth, you know, she said things to the youth that we don't know today. Get that book, those books. Youth Instructors. This is in Youth Instructor, September 8, 1898. It is not correct to say, as many writers have said, that Christ was like all children. Can it get any plainer? It is not right to say he was like all children. He was not like all children. End of quote. All right, let's look at it some more. His inclination to write was a constant gratification to his parents. Oh, there's that line again. No one looking upon the childlike countenance shining with animation could say that Christ was just like other children. Did you hear what she's doing here? She said, don't you use the phrase just like with Jesus. I think a lot of people have missed this. He was not just like other children. He was God in human flesh. When urged by his companions to do wrong, divinity flushed through humanity, and he refused decidedly. In a moment, he distinguished between right and wrong. Now, I take great comfort in these kinds of statements. They're beautiful. They're the truth. They tell us reality. No, I think there's a little clue hiding in here. It says, no one looking. Did you catch that as we went by? No one looking at that shiny countenance could say he was like other children. You know what the problem is? You have to look at Jesus. Not theology. Not tapes. Not books written on the nature of Christ. Look at Jesus. And when you see Jesus, you can't come up with certain conclusions. BC 1128. This is a most difficult page for a lot of people. Be careful, exceedingly careful as to how you dwell upon the human nature of Christ. Do not set him before the people as a man with propensities to sin. Of sin, excuse me, the word is of there. Do not. Now, is that God talking or isn't it? Do you think we ought to obey God? This is in print. All of us can go read this. Do not set Jesus before the people as a man with propensities of sin. Don't do it. He is the second Adam. The first Adam was created pure. I'm going to stop reading because we need to break these sentences down. We need to be thinking as this is going by. She just said, a first Adam, a second Adam. The first Adam was created pure. How would the second Adam be created? Well, if he's going to be an Adam, he's got to be pure. If he's not an Adam, then he can be like the first one that's fallen and just be one of him. But he's not one of him. He's a new one. Jesus, the second Adam, was a sinless being without a taint of sin upon him. He was in the image of God. He could fall. Now, what did the first Adam do? He fell. He did fall because of transgression. Because of sin, his posterity was born with inherent propensities of disobedience. Who is his prosperity? Does it say, I got that way eventually by a wrong choice? That's what's being taught out there. It says, every child of Adam was born 1 second into their life, born with the propensity to sin. Didn't we just read a statement that says, don't you ever say Jesus had a propensity of sin? Well, you put those two statements together now. Jesus is not like any of the prosperity of Adam. None of them. Back to the quote. But Jesus Christ was the only begotten Son of God. He took upon himself human nature and was tempted in all points as human nature is tempted. He could have sinned. He could have fallen. But for not one moment was there in him an evil propensity. He was assailed with temptations in the wilderness as Adam was assailed with temptations in Eden. Did you hear that? What condition was Adam in when he was assailed? It says here, Jesus was assailed in the same way, in the same condition that Adam was in before he fell. That's 11:28. Now I'm going to stop here because everybody who studies the human nature of Christ from the point of view of before or after Adam knows this statement. And I can prove it the next time you talk to someone on this subject. And please be careful. You don't want to win arguments. You want to win a heart. It's very difficult to do. Read this statement, and I'll tell you what they're going to say. Because I know this. It only goes one direction. If you're talking to someone who doesn't want to know something, they can only say one thing. Oh, that's the Baker letter. That's what they say. And that's in print in books. They know this statement, and what they want to do is neutralize it so it can't be read from God. What is that? The Baker letter. If you don't know about the Baker letter, just a brief. Baker was the name of a minister, a Seventh-day Adventist minister, who at the time of this writing was in Tasmania as a minister. He apparently had some strange ideas about when Jesus became God as a man. He believed in something called adoptionism, which means briefly that Jesus was born just as a human being, and as a human being he grew and developed until he understood what the Bible was saying. At a certain time he chose correctly and he became God in the flesh. No, you have to admit that's kind of weird, isn't it? That is strange thinking. And there was a Seventh-day Adventist minister who believed that way. Ellen White wrote to him. No one knows why she wrote to this minister in Tasmania. I mean, Tasmania? Who can he harm down there? Well, one was enough, I guess. She wrote to him, and she said some very interesting things. Now, the people who don't like what she said in this letter to that man say, that was not a testimony to the church, that was only to him. And I can name you some books at the ABC that tell you you can't trust the Baker letter because it was written to that man. Now, I'm not here to destroy anybody's credibility. All I'm trying to do is reveal statements to you in the spirit of prophecy that you can read and make up your own mind what's happening. So what the people are saying about this statement, who don't want you to know that this statement is inspired, they're saying that Ellen White said something here she doesn't say anyplace else. Well, I hope by the time we're done here with about 37 pages of quotes that you will find she consistently said the same thing, no matter where you go. And there are statements in the Baker letter on Christology that stand all by themselves, no matter who she wrote it to. They are truth. just because it's on the subject of Christ. I want you to notice something about this particular portion we just read. I'm going to give you some points now to go back and study for yourself. Number one, she said the subject of the human nature of Christ must be handled carefully. It's not a subject for debates. It's not a subject for theological quarrels. It's not a subject you can just go out and make up your own mind and spread your opinions. See, you be very careful how you deal with this. Number two, the point-blank statement is made that there are no evil propensities in Christ. Number three, he's the second Adam. Number four, the first Adam could choose to fall, and he did. In order to fall, that first Adam had to be first pure, sinless, and without a taint of sin. Well, Jesus was also pure, sinless, without a taint of sin. Number six, Jesus, did you catch it as it went by, is the only begotten Son of God. Did you catch that as it went by? What does the term only begotten really mean? The only one of a kind, homogenes. We did that last time. She said Jesus is the only one of a kind. Number seven, Jesus could have chosen to sin, but he did not because there were no propensities to sin in him. Now all that is in that little paragraph we read. And that little paragraph is not appreciated by a lot of people. It says too much, too clearly. Again, on page 1128, the same letter, quote, avoid every question in relation to the humanity of Christ which is liable to be misunderstood. Truth lies close to the track of presumption. In treating upon the humanity of Christ, you need to guard seriously every assertion, lest your words be taken to mean more than they imply, and thus you lose or dim the clear perceptions of the humanity as combined with divinity. Does it register how important it is that you maintain the person of Jesus? Don't talk about his humanity by itself. Don't talk about the divinity by itself. You will ruin the clear perception of the Bible, truth, the reality that Jesus is one person. His birth was a miracle. His birth was a miracle. Well, who says it wasn't? Well, obviously, when you make him altogether human, you're saying he was born just like everybody else. No, he was not born just like everybody else. His birth was a miracle. These words do not refer to any human being except the Son of the infinite God. Never in any way leave the slightest impression upon human minds that a taint of or an inclination to corruption rested upon Christ, or that he in any way yielded to corruption. He was tempted in all points like as man is tempted, yet he is called that holy thing. End of quote. Oh, I hope you go home and you start underlining these and you start making a string of some way you can get to these so you can see them again. the next time somebody tells you something opposite from this, you'll know that's not the Word of God. I have seen the Word of God. And yet there are people who have been brainwashed, I'll have to use the term, into thinking that if he wasn't just like us, somehow that's an obstacle in the plan of salvation. The first word they say is, well, do you mean he had an advantage over me? That's the first thing they say. And for some reason, they think that's a legitimate question. Do you know that question's not in the Bible? It's not there. It's not in the Spirit prophecy. First selected messages, page 253. What a sight was this for heaven to look upon! Christ, who knew not the least taint of sin or defilement, took our nature in its deteriorated condition. This was humiliation greater than finite man can comprehend. God was manifest in the flesh. He humbled himself. What a subject for thought, for deep, earnest contemplation, so infinitely great that he was the majesty of heaven, and yet he stooped so low without losing one atom of his glory. Have you ever seen that sentence before? He stooped so low, and yet without losing one atom of his glory. He was still God in the flesh. And I really don't understand the mystery of all this, because in John, the first chapter, it says, we beheld his glory. The Word was made flesh. It's in all of our Bibles. So let's start understanding the problem here a little bit so we can understand the answers to the problem a little more clearly. On page 252, same book. After the fall of man, Satan declared that human beings were proved to be incapable of keeping the law of God. And he sought to carry the universe with him in this belief. Are you getting it? Satan says you can't keep the law of God. Who said it? That's not God talking, is it? Who are you going to believe? Oh, you see, all of us were born like Adam after the fall. That's where it works. All of us. And when we were born into this world, we were not friends with God. We believed every lie Satan told us. And when you became a Christian, you did not get past all of those lies because you don't know what they all are yet. And when you hear a Seventh-day Adventist repeat those lies, what are you going to do? That's hard, isn't it? But we have all around us people in deception, and maybe I'm deceived too in certain areas. We all have little spots that we don't see things clearly. We need to be very careful and wait until we get in front of God's Word and let Him speak to us and let Him just bring it to us. This is the truth. And then we know. Let's continue here. Satan's words appeared to be true. And Christ came to unmask the deceiver. The majesty of heaven undertook the cause of man, and with the same facilities that man may obtain, withstood the temptations of Satan, as man must withstand them. Well, why did Satan's lie appear to be true? That man can't keep the law. It's impossible for them to keep the law. Because it is, if they're not a Christian. But God did not make anybody a sinner. But when we become Christians, now He can turn us into true men. Where it is possible to obey God, where we can learn that and develop and grow in such a way that to us it becomes a natural thing, but not overnight. We have to believe it first. Then we have to practice it. Then we have to live in it. And then we move through the plan with God so that one day He can say, it's time for the harvest. Now, I'm going to make you a lawkeeper for all eternity. See? The problem is, we have been sold a bill of goods by the AMA. They say, you're sick. Well, I'll tell you what, take this pill and everything will be all right. God is not going to give us a pill. He says, you do it the right way. Get some sunshine. Get some good pure water. Get some exercise. Get some rest. And this is going to take a while, but it's going to work. Sermons and Talks, Volume 1, page 241. You cannot keep the law. That's the quote. You cannot keep the law. No, it is impossible for man of himself to keep the law. He cannot do it. But what can he do? Lay hold by living faith of the righteousness of Jesus Christ and present to the Father the righteousness of Jesus and the fragrance of His character is brought into the life. Now, I'm going to stop there because most people read these statements and they say, oh, I have to start harder. That's page 241, Sermons and Talks. I just have to try harder. No, that isn't what the statement says. We need to try harder after we're Christians. We don't try harder to become Christians. Jesus comes to us as a gift. How would you feel if you gave a very valuable gift to somebody you love? I don't know how you paid for it, but you paid for it somehow, and you gave it to them. And you tell them, you know, this is the way I feel about you. I give this to you. And it's valuable enough that they look at that and say, oh, that's really, that's really a gift. And then the next week, the person comes by and says, here's $50. And you say, what is that? Well, I know you gave it to me, and I accept it as a gift. But I can't let you give me something like that. I have to give you something. You know, here's $50, and I'll give you more next week, and a month from now I'll give you a little bit more. And that person spends the rest of their life giving you little bits of money here and there for the gift you gave them. I mean, how would that make you feel? I mean, what's wrong with that person? Don't they know I love them? I gave it to them. Jesus, with his own blood, gave us a gift of life and forgiveness and cleansing and development. And what do we turn around and try to do? We spend the rest of our life trying to say, oh, I'll get better. I'll stop doing that. Oh, just let me reach this place and I'll really do it. What a thing to do to a perfect, loving God. But it's not because we're being evil. It's because we don't understand. See? And we have to be helped to understand. That's why we talk to each other. That's why we share with one another. So somebody who's advanced 2 minutes more than this one can say it, and then this one catches up, and then they both move, and then this one learns something and teaches this one, and back and forth. Satan is dethroned. He is emptied out of the house. And the vacuum is supplied by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Christ sits enthroned in the human soul. Christ never wars against Christ. That's a powerful thought. We won't deal with it right now. Back on the other side of page 253, this. Christ came to the earth taking humanity and standing as man's representative to show that man, to show in the controversy with Satan that man, as God created him, connected with the Father and the Son, could obey every divine requirement. So did Jesus come to do what people are saying? He came to agonize against sin and to move against that terrible bent in him to want to sin and resist it and just have a horrible time not sinning. Is that what he came to show? That's not in the Bible. He came to show us what a man looks like that's connected with God the way he made him in the first place. That's what he came to show. And you know, once he did it, and he proved what a man looks like that God makes, I said, well, now, let's get you moving in the program, and let's become men again, the way God created them, connected. So the issue is not, did Jesus come to be like me? The issue is, he came so I can be like him. The first Adam came connected. The second Adam came connected. Don't ever give these thoughts up. These are Bible thoughts. These are spirit of prophecy. These are from God. Three selected messages, 133. In the councils of heaven, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So if you're going to have an original likeness, who was like who? So God created man his own image. In the image of God created he him. The Lord created man's moral faculties and his physical powers. All was a sinless transcript of himself. God endowed man with holy attributes and placed him in a garden made expressly for him. Sin alone could ruin the beings created by the hand of the Almighty. The first Adam was a sinless transcript of God. That is so powerful. That's the only kind of an Adam God can make. A sinless transcript of himself. I have to watch myself because I can easily become indignant when a person drags Jesus down the way they do and make him an ordinary man. There's something in me that rises up and says, you can't do that. You mustn't do it. And I have to tell you, in the last 25, 30 years that this has been going on, I have bit my tongue so hard. Youth instructor, June 2nd, 1898. Christ is called the second Adam. In purity and holiness, connected with God and beloved by God, he began where the first Adam began. I have never seen that statement in anybody's writings. Willingly, he passed over the ground where Adam fell and redeemed Adam's failure. Now please get that picture in your mind, because she says it many times, that Jesus went over the ground where Adam fell. And people think that means, well, after he fell, Jesus went over the same ground. No! That's not what those statements say. The statements say, where Adam went and then he fell, Jesus went, but he didn't fall. They both were innocent when they started. They both were sinless when they started. They both were pure when they started. They both were holy when they started. And nobody's ever going to convince me that's just like me. It's not going to happen. I don't need somebody that's like me to come to try to save me. (5 BC, 1080). Our substitute and surety passed over the ground where Adam stumbled and fell. And the question was, will he stumble and fall, as Adam did over God's commandments? He met Satan's attacks again and again with, "It is written," and Satan left the field of conflict a conquered foe. Christ has redeemed Adam's disgraceful fall and has perfected a character of perfect obedience and left an example for the human family that they may imitate the pattern. Now, the people who talk about Jesus coming in the nature of Adam before the fall don't generally approve of this idea of imitation. Well, they're as wrong that way as this group is that way. Jesus did come to give us a pattern to follow. He's our example. But only as Christians. It has nothing to do with justification. That's a gift. We are to imitate Jesus because we are his children. Continuing the quote. Had Jesus failed on one point in reference to the law of God, he would not have been a perfect offering. For it was on one point only that Adam failed. What brought us all this misery? One bite of fruit. Boy, that's horrible, to bite a piece of fruit. It wasn't biting the fruit that did it, was it? He went against the expressed will of God. That brought all this. If Jesus had done that one time, that'd have been it forever. Not even by a thought. Did we read that? It never crossed his mind to go against the expressed will of his Father. How could he have had a pull to do that? There's no such thing. That's out of somebody's imagination. And let me tell you, that's a pretty bad thought to come up with. I'm struggling which way to go here because there's material I want to cover today, and we're already past time. I'm going to move over to Desire of Ages. I've got to remember where I was here. Okay. I want to go to Desire of Ages, about 685, somewhere in there. Let me get to it. 685. Now, A.T. Jones, who was a very able Bible student and a tremendous speaker, who was not afraid to go anywhere to defend Adventism. He stood before the legislature of this country. And in 1888, he had a message from God on justification by faith. But I'm afraid somewhere along the line, he got too big for his britches. And he started, it appears, thinking that what he said was the truth in all areas. And he got off in the area of the nature of Christ in his humanity, and he began saying some things that I think Ellen White warned him about. I say I think because his name is not in the testimonies that we have preserved for us. But you can see the links. And she warned him not to do certain things. Now, I'm only bringing up A.T. Jones because he is the bottom of some of the things that we're dealing with today. He's the one that people are quoting. One of the things that's being said, because he said certain things, was that Jesus not only was one of us, he was us. That's what he said. And people moved from that thought, and A.T. Jones began to teach that Jesus took our sins in his human nature at his birth. I want to read you something that's in Desire of Ages, and you to see what you make out of it. Starting with page 685, this chapter is on Gethsemane. Now, when was Gethsemane in terms of Jesus' life? Okay, right at the end of his life. All right, remember that. He was walking with the disciples, and he became strangely silent. Quote, he had often visited this spot for meditation and prayer, but never with a heart so full of sorrow. Now I want you to pick up that word, never. Something is happening at Gethsemane that has not happened before. John 8:29, he that sent me is with me. The Father had not left me alone. I always do those things that please him. Now, when could Jesus say that in his lifetime? Did you say always? Oh, all right, get that in your head. From his early infancy, that bright shining face we read, he was not like other children. He lived a life of constantly with this inclination to write. I always do those things that please my Father. That is the life of Jesus. Right after that quote in John, this is what is stated. But now, at Gethsemane, but now, he seemed to be shut out from the light of God's presence. When in conflict with men who were inspired by the very spirit of Satan, he could say, he that sent me is with me. Okay? But now, he was numbered with the transgressors. When? Not before Gethsemane. A.T. Jones got it wrong. And the people who follow A.T. Jones have a major problem in understanding what the Bible is saying. The guilt of fallen humanity, he must bear. It doesn't say he's been doing it all along. It doesn't say that. No, something is different. Upon him at Gethsemane, who knew no sin, must be laid the iniquity of us all. You see how plain that is? I can't read all of this. I want to get through. You go and read this chapter carefully. As they approached the garden, the disciples had marked the change that came over their master. Never before had they seen him so utterly sad and silent. Never before. He groaned aloud. I'm skipping down 2 paragraphs. He was being separated from his Father. The gulf was so broad, so black, so deep, his spirit shuddered before it. This agony, he must not exert his divine power to escape. Well, if he didn't have divine power, why should it bother him? As man, he must suffer the consequences of man's sin. As man, he must endure the wrath of God against transgression. Christ was now standing in a different attitude from that which he had ever stood before. Why? Because he's getting our sins on him. He didn't have them before that. He saw what justice meant. Hitherto he had been as an intercessor for others. Now he longed to have an intercessor for himself. As Christ felt his unity with the Father broken up, he feared that in his human nature he would be unable to endure the coming conflict. So here's where he began to feel what that human nature was not capable of. Okay? If you're going to put some timelines on the statements, here's one you can focus on. Jesus felt it. He knew the weakness of humanity to meet the grave issues of sin. But he didn't have any sin. He was sinless. He was dealing with our sin. Christ's soul was filled with dread of separation from God. Not for anything he did. The sins of men weighed heavily upon Christ, and the sense of God's wrath against sin was crushing out his life. Now there's somebody who knew what sin meant. We go on day by day and we have no idea what sin is. We just think it's something that we need to get confessed or it's going to catch us. But we don't know what it is. We don't know how horrible it is. Why God hates it. We don't have any sense of it. The one who had always had words of sympathy for his disciples was now suffering superhuman agony. What was that superhuman agony? He was feeling the enormity of sin. Sin is what gave him agony. Terrible was the temptation to let the human race bear the consequences of their own guilt while he stood innocent before God. Now I want to ask you, when is Jesus seeing this possibility of letting them, us, take it for ourselves or stay innocent? At the end of his life, he is still being called innocent. No other human being could that ever be said of. Only him. Innocent. I'm going past pages now. A short time before, this is 689, a short time before Jesus had stood like a mighty cedar, withstanding the storm of opposition that spent its fury upon him. Stubborn wills and hearts filled with malice and subtlety had striven in vain to confuse and overpower him. He stood forth in divine majesty as the Son of God. Now he was like a reed beaten and bent by the angry storm. He had claimed oneness with God. He had poured out his songs of praise. He had spoken to his disciples in words of courage and tenderness. Now had come the hour of the power of darkness. Now his voice was heard on the still evening air, not in tones of triumph, but full of human anguish. He went to see his friends praying with him and for him. And they were asleep. So he went back. Turning away, Jesus sought again his retreat, and he felt prostrate. He fell on the ground. He couldn't stand up anymore. Overcome by the horror of great darkness, the humanity of the Son of God trembled in that trying hour. He prayed not now for his disciples that their faith might not fail, but for his own tempted, agonized soul. So when was he meeting the test that Adam failed? See? This is hitting him with full force. He's never felt this before. He's never experienced this before. He's always been the Son of God. But now he has your sins and my sins on him, and he's paying for it. And the question is, will he fall like Adam did? See? That's where these statements fit. Not when he walked by the local bakery and decided he was going to have a Twinkie or not have a Twinkie. That wasn't the issues in his life. Not whether he should steal that, not whether he should take that heroin, not whether he should see that movie. None of that. He was a Son of God, here to minister to the human race, to reveal the character of God. But now, at Gethsemane, that's all different. Now, the sinless one has your and my sins on him. And something has to be done with all that sin. Will the innocent suffer the consequences of the curse of sin to save the guilty? Oh, Father, oh, if it's possible, take this cup away from me. Yeah, Jesus said that. He said it, and he meant it. Oh, is there another way? You know, I have talked to some people who say, see, Jesus had a conflict with his Father. He was not agreeing with the Father. He said, take the cup away. That's not what Jesus was saying. His prayer now breathes only submission. If this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. There's the truth. Whatever it costs me, thy will be done. Having made the decision, he fell dying to the ground. Now, if you hear that sentence carefully, having made the decision. Have we made the decision? The decision? See? Steps to Christ says what we need to do is understand the force of the will. The power of decision. When we decide, then God does something. He's not going to decide for us, and He's not going to give us power before. After the decision, He says, now my honor is at stake to back you up all the way. The honor of God is at stake in the perfection of his people. That's Desire of Ages. God suffered with his Son. Could mortals have viewed the amazement of the angelic host as in silent grief they watched the Father separating his beams of light, love, and glory from his beloved Son? It all happened at Gethsemane. Everybody wants to say it happened at the cross. No, it happened at Gethsemane. The people who've not understood this say it was at his birth. No! At Gethsemane, Jesus took it. All of it. And the Father had to treat all that sin the way he always does. He hates sin. He loves the sinner, but he hates sin. And Jesus had all of it. I'm not going to go through the part that Satan's doing through all this. You read it. Satan telling him, you're doing it for those people who join your church? Those kinds of people? You're going through all this for them? Those ungrateful wretches who are going to do it over and over again? Who will? You go read it. What Satan told Jesus. And how could Jesus deny it? It was the truth. Judas, Peter, the apostles, the Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah. But Gabriel came. And he picked his head up off the ground. He says humanity can't do it by itself. It's impossible for a human to go through this. The Father will give you strength. You have to see it through yourself, through faith. But the Father will give you the strength. You will see the travail of your soul. You will see multitudes of redeemed when you're through this. And that's how Jesus made the decision. He says, yes, that's true. It says it in Isaiah, doesn't it? I will see it. We'll see this all the way through. We came to save the humans. We're going to get some. A multitude. Yes, whatever it costs. Let's go. He still had agony because it was during this time that the blood started coming out of him. The pressure on those cells was too great for the body to hold anymore. His anguish was destroying his body. His face was all blood-stained. He was tasting the kind of suffering no human could take. He was experiencing the suffering of dying of the whole human race. Now, this is not our subject today, but there are people who say he died the second death. No, he didn't. It was the suffering of the dying that he went through. You're not suffering when you're dead. You only suffer when you're getting there. And that's the suffering he went through. And it made the blood come out of his tissues. Well, Judas had been doing his work. And here comes the mob. They're going to come for us someday, you know. Here comes the mob. And Jesus stood up. And God took away all the signs of the blood from him, cleaned him up. gave him strength, and he stood up. And he said, "Who are you looking for?" And Judas is over there. He said, "I'll show you who he is." Judas went up there to him. He said, "Master." And he went up and he kissed him. Judas kissed him. "Master." And Jesus looked at him. He said, "Friend." Would you have called a person like that friend? "Friend, do you betray me with a kiss?" Well, I just want to put one more thing to rest here before we quit today. People say that because Jesus was now sin, the ones who've understood some of this, they say, well, now he's sin all the way to the cross. No, he is not sin. He has sin on him. He is not sin. He is innocent. He is pure. He is holy with our sins on him. How do I know that for sure? Well, I'll tell you, here's how I know for sure. When they laid him on the cross, and they were nailing him to that cross, he didn't say a word. He was, great drops of sweat were coming out of him. That hurt. But he didn't say anything. When they nailed him, then he said, "Father, Father." That was not a lost sinner on the cross. That was pure, sinless Jesus talking to his Father. He said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And the Father answered that prayer. Not of a sinner, of his pure, sinless Son. And the thief on the cross knew more than the theologians of today. He looked over and he said, "You know, that's the Son of God." He didn't say that's a lost sinner just like me. He said, "Lord, remember me." And Jesus did not look at him like a criminal. He looked at him and he said, "I forgive you." Jesus was still forgiving people on the cross. "I forgive you." He didn't say those words, but that's what he meant. He said, "You will be with me. I have the power." Me on the cross. And I could take you through more things. Don't try to make Jesus altogether human, one such as ourselves. It can never be.